Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Findaway Productions with your co-host, Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is the Coaching 101 podcast. I am Daniel Chamberlain here with Coach Kenny Simpson. How's it going on your end this evening, Coach?
I was going well. I managed to, my daughter had a birthday, so we did a day at the lake to celebrate. And I realized I'm officially old because my daughter is now an adult. So I'm an adult that has an adult. And so my wife and I have decided that means you're like super old now.
Today is my son's 5th birthday, and he seems like an adult. So that has been our weekend. We've had 3 parties for the kid. And he probably still needs more birthday whippings than he's got. So, and 5-year-olds, man, they're wild.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't change much. They grow up a little bit. I've got a boy, 15. They do get better most of the way, but then you have other problems. What you're dealing with now that seem small, those just get bigger. So get ready.
That's great. We are joined tonight by my head coach over at Stillwell High School, and that is Coach Beau Collins. How's it going, Coach?
Going good. Glad to be here tonight. Spent the day on the softball field coaching softball, like 10-year-old girls. Made it through 5 games with them and minimally sunburnt. So
there we go.
Not a bad day.
Getting your summer legs on.
Yes.
That's good. Coach, man, we're super glad you could join us tonight. The episode tonight is going to be talking about moving from a coordinator or an assistant position up to a head coach. I know it's kind of one of the biggest jumps in responsibility, and a lot of people don't know what lies on the other side of that desk, right? Once you take the big desk, I've heard Coach Collins talk about, I've heard other head coaches in my past talk about, like, all the things that you don't know were there. It's just a little hidden trap. You take it because that's what coaches are supposed to do, and then we fall into these little traps. So that'll be the conversation tonight. But before we get going there, man, I'd really like you just to introduce yourself, kind of tell the crowd who you are and how you got here.
So I have been coaching for 15 years now. Spent the biggest part of that time as a defensive coordinator. 10 years as a defensive coordinator. The whole time thinking I was ready for the head coach's job. And what's funny is all 10 years I really spent as a defensive coordinator was with the same head coach. So I'm sure he got tired of me constantly saying, hey, I'm ready. I'm going to go look for a head coaching position and interviewing for those. And then got to do 2 years as an offensive coordinator, which were a nice relief from the other side of the ball. And then finally got the head coaching job at Stillwell and took over there as the head coach and the offensive coordinator, and was surprised by all the things that I didn't know that I thought I did.
Yeah, I think that has to be like the biggest secret in the industry. And I don't know that anyone can get you ready for it. There are podcasts. I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast. There's books, there's articles. And I don't know if it's just a lack of trying or people just truly can't capture what that is. But, man, there's definitely, like you said, you think you're ready, but maybe you're not. And the other side of the coin is no one's ever ready. So if you think you're not ready, you're right. And that's okay because no one is. So, kind of just whatever side of the coin you lie on there, I guess, with your feelings about yourself. Well, Coach, man, we're super glad to have you. We will get through our little session here, and then we'll kind of get into our questions. My phone is recording us, everything I say, so that's super creepy. I don't know.
AI,
your Siri.
AI is going to take your job.
Wild. Yeah. Holy cow. Coach Simpson, besides AI, can you tell us some ways that coaches can make football simple for their staff and their players?
Sure. This podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions houses offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, from the O-line academy and books to the offensive coordinator academy to quarterback manuals. There's all kinds of materials over there. offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Also, it houses defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, which houses multiple workbooks, multiple materials, and of course the Defensive Line Academy, as well as the Defensive Coordinator Academy and several one-off courses that a coach can take. Finally, it's also sponsoring fbcoachsimpson.com, which houses headsets, which is behind me if you're watching us. There's now 3 years worth of headsets, all free magazines. It also houses the Gun Tee offense. If you want to learn the Gun Tee, every material you might want is over there, from books to game film to PowerPoints to the whole enchilada if you want the system. And it also houses the 3-4 swarm system. Same deal. Go find the books, go find the PowerPoints, go find the how-to manuals, or just get the whole system if you'd like that.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And I will go ahead and shamelessly plug our little business adventure. So I've got a couple of them. Number one is Adaptable PT, that is Adaptable Physical Therapy in Grove, Oklahoma. Now my wife works there. I technically work there, but I'm sure she's ready for me to be done with school and on whatever summer break a coach gets and come do I'm supposed to be the billing professional. And she's like, honey, will you please come to work and take care of the billing? Because she's tired of doing everything. But head over to Grove, Oklahoma. We're over on 3rd Street. That is Adaptable Physical Therapy. She is a concussion specialist. She specializes in geriatrics as well. But the sports performance is really where she's kind of cutting her teeth and ready to make your players as good as they can be, help them rehab injuries, but more than anything is prevent them in the first place. So that's in Grove, Oklahoma. The other one is athletic-speedandmovement.com. That's athletic-speedandmovement.com. That is a little side hustle I got going on where we're taking Dell Basket's 45 plus years of speed training excellence and bringing it to you. So we've still got an early bird special right now. If you get in and you're the first 100 people, I believe it's 100, maybe it's 50. I don't know. We'll figure it out, but you're getting it for 50% off. It is a yearly subscription. Come in, get the plan. You know, a lot of people say you can't coach speed, and I think that's just completely incorrect. With the youth of today, especially that, you know, they don't watch football, they hardly play sports, man, they don't have, you know, body awareness. So just taking kids, teaching them how to run, helping them increase that speed. We're seeing great results with the program, and Dale has for years. He's been at the NFL level. He's been at collegiate level. We had him over at Stillwell and kind of did a couple day little recording with our kids, and he brought a NFL running back with him that had been training with him for several years. So a lot of people doing it, but it's a program that we're very, very proud and very excited to kind of break out into and get out to your community. So that's athletic-speedandmovement.com. Check out the iguana. We got a sweet iguana as our logo because, you know, iguanas can outrun humans, if you didn't know, and some of them walk on 2 legs. So here we go. 31 miles an hour. That's the fastest iguana.
I think those are called dinosaurs if they do that.
Absolutely. All right, man. So appreciate it. And we'll push through here. Question number 1. And Coach Collins, man, we're gonna let you answer a bunch of these first, and Coach Simpson, I'm sure will feed back in. And I've never been a head coach, so I'm gonna just take notes and talk little as possible. So number 1, what position is the hardest in football other than the head coach? So we're gonna start you with a curveball.
You know, probably I would say the defensive coordinator is the hardest position. Usually in most teams, you're the guy opposite of the head coach and the offensive coordinator. So you're kind of responsible for it by itself or by yourself. And it's just a complicated side of the ball. You've got a lot of moving pieces that have to get lined up right and react right. And you've got to make sure that all of your coaches are coaching those keys up right and the things they've got to be doing. And in my experience, I took over my first year as a DC. Had a lot of help, thankfully, from my head coach. And then about week 6, it was, hey, see you, you're on your own. And he would just kind of check in and make sure he knew what I was planning, what the game plan was, and kind of thankfully put the trust in me to take over and to kind of make it my own and be responsible for it.
I've done 1 year of the DC and the install, and it man, that is wild. And Coach Simpson, have you DC'd before, Coach Simpson? Or
I have. My first coordinator job was, I think every coach should be a DC. I was a DC for 2 years. I think I've moved to offense, but I think you learn offense a lot better by understanding defense, you know, just like anything else. And kind of going with Coach's deal, I think the key thing he said was the guy who's opposite the head coach. So if the head coach is kind of an offensive-minded guy, then that DC role is really big. If the head coach is kind of defensive-minded, then the offensive side is really big because, like you said, you're kind of your own mini head coach. You know, for a while there, you kind of will work with him and until he knows, trust you, and then he'll turn you loose. I would probably lean. I think being a DC is tough for a lot of reasons. Schematically, I think being a defensive coordinator is probably the toughest job other than being a head coach. I think pressure-wise, being an offensive coordinator is probably the toughest job other than being the head coach. Because if you give up a touchdown, everyone knows that on defense, but they don't really know, hey, coach, why are you running bracket cover 4? No one knows that, but they will yell you quit running the ball, if you're on offense, or because everyone thinks they can call plays, so they're both different kind of in their own worlds. And if you're a young head coach or a young coach listening, both can get you to where you want to get as a head coach. Don't think you got to go one way or the other. I would say if you're not a coordinator, probably the O-line. And Daniel, I know we've talked about this on a couple other podcasts, but the O-line is another, because you kind of have 5 guys that you're in your own world a lot of times doing the O-line, or being a strength guy. Like if you can be the guy in charge of the weight room, that's a good stepping stone because it lets you kind of set the culture and the tone. You're dealing with discipline. You're dealing with multiple kids. You're dealing with organizing coaches. Coach Collins kind of talked about that. Like in those coordinator roles or strength coordinator, whatever it is, you're now having to start working with other coaches. And that's where the game really changes. I know we'll talk more about it as we go tonight, but that's where the game kind of changes is you're not working with kids anymore. You're now working with grown men. And that's a very different animal.
I'm going to change the answer for me than both of you. And I'm going to say whoever the DB coach is. And it's because the kids you're trying to coach are spread across the field. You have 2 different assignments in there. So you're into, especially if you got safeties and corners. So your safeties are, they've got to be able to play run and pass, but your corners are supposed to be bailing, but they all think they're linebackers, especially at high school level. So they all want to come up and make the tackle. There's nothing worse than your DC staring at you and going, or for me, I'm in the box and he's like, hey, you had one thing to do, and that was don't get beat deep. And what happens, right? We're giving up 70-yard bombs or whatever. So yes, the DC, but at least you're in control of your own element. You're in control of the scheme you're running. You can change out people. I guess every position really can, but I feel like the DB's coach is you're trying to watch a lot of kids do their job, and you're not always in charge of the scheme. So I think all of them have their merits, though. It's hard to coach football. Can we just agree to that? Like, it's not an easy gig to do. We'll jump to the second question real quick, and that is, what's the biggest challenges to making the transition to head coach, Coach Collins?
The biggest challenge, probably in the transition itself, is the administrative side of it. Most guys I think that get that job as the head coach has probably been there long enough to have their schematic stuff, their system in place, hopefully, and do well with the X's and O's and the coaching side of it. I think, at least for me, it was the administrative stuff, making sure all the forms are done, all the this and that was done, and probably not delegating that out was one of my pitfalls. I think I could have done a better job my first year of finding guys that could be really good at maybe making the inventory or the physical list. And then I think Coach Simpson talked about it earlier. The other thing that I would say was a huge, maybe not problem, but hurdle in transition was being in charge of other men. As the DC, I was in charge of a couple of position groups, or, those coaches answered to me as far as my DB coach, my D-line coach, but it was just 2 of them. And it felt a lot more like we were in it together and working on it together. And it wasn't so much that I was the boss or the guy in charge. And that transition, or that feeling of being the guy in charge, the one they all look to and not kind of separate from them a little bit, I guess, was something that bothered me my first year.
Yeah, that's tough stuff, man. I think when you make it, kind of going from a position coach or whatever to being a head coach, Coach hit on a bunch of the stuff there. And I'm going to start on his last point and then kind of work backward. When you deal with grown men, you kind of have different expectations, or I did. Like, you expect grown men to act like grown men. And the reality is they don't always do that. I don't do that. You don't do that. Daniel doesn't always do that. And so, but we're not used to being the one that's accountable to like call out other people. That's a very uncomfortable world to be in. It's a lonely place to be in, because when I walk in the office, a lot of times all the laughter and the chit chat kind of stops. They're not necessarily talking about me, I know, but it's different. or they might be talking about me. That's the way it kind of goes. You have to be comfortable in that world where it's kind of like you said, it can be lonely. You go from kind of being a buddy to now I got to be the one that brings in a guy behind a closed door and addresses issues that I don't really want to address. I don't know how you guys are, but we'll get principals coming to me, hey, can you talk to one of your coaches about something in the classroom? I'm like, man, I really don't feel like that's my job, but it kind of is my job because this is my guy. I got to do it. And here's what you see. And on top of all this, if you're a young coach listening, you have all these Twitter gurus that say we can all be buddies and kumbaya. Well, that's bullcrap. Life does not work that way. You have to have a line where guys know this guy's in charge, at least for this 2 hours. At least for those 2 hours, we're not really friends. We are friends, but I am working for this coach, and there has to be a certain level of decorum or respect. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to be some tyrant, but there's got to be kind of I'm not going to fail my job because there's going to be some accountability somewhere. I think that was big. And I wrote down, Coach hit a couple other things. You don't think about as an assistant coach, fundraising. You don't think about budgets. I didn't think about them. I didn't think about, like Coach mentioned, delegating. I didn't think about I had that many jobs to delegate. When I was a coordinator, I drew up plays and dealt with certain scheme. You don't think about like dealing with parents. You don't really think about that as an assistant. No one goes to the assistant coach unless it's to complain about the head coach. They go to the head coach if they want to complain about the program. And so you deal with all that kind of stuff, all that discipline stuff. So it can be really, really tough. And I think Coach hit a lot of those things, on the head, and you're not, it's just a tough, so it can be really, really tough, especially if you're listening to this and you're young. Like, I think as you're older, you get older like me, I've got an adult daughter now. So now I'm old enough. It's not as hard for me to call in a coach and talk to him. It was really hard at 28 years old to call in 40-year-old guys and have those conversations. Guys that might know more football than I know. Like, that was I was uncomfortable. And I bet you can probably tell it's not like I'm afraid of confrontation, but I didn't really want to do that, and that was a hard thing to do.
I've been lucky that in my military career, it has just kind of broken that ice for me. So I'm like, but I also know, and weirdly, I had this conversation with my wife today, just like, I know that someday I'll get that job. And we talked about, like, because we're about to have employees, right, as adaptable. So we're kind of preparing for that as well. And I'm like, I almost want to print the military forms of like initial counselings and quarterly counselings. And it's those conversations as a boss you really need to be having with whomever your teacher, in this case, you're their boss, but coaching or developing or teaching. That way they know where they stand. And that was a situation I had with a previous head coach. Was like, they would never let me know where I was until I was fired, right? It was literally what the guy said was, nope, love everything you're doing, keep doing it. 3 days before I was sitting in front of a superintendent going home or being done with sports for the year. Like, so having honest conversations and having that conversation, let them know where they stand, what they're doing right and wrong. Like, those things I feel like you have to do. The military kind of, that's cooked in, man. Like, that'll be in me forever. And I understand, like, it's looking from the outside in at some of you guys that are already head coaches. All that's just natural for you. Coach Simpson, you said that you don't want to take an older man and close the door and say, hey, dude, this is what you're screwing up on, especially if he's going to tell you how your scheme sucks, right? Or what might he say back to me that could make this very odd.
Yeah, well, think about, like, and I don't know about Coach Collins, I don't know about your situation, but a lot of times, especially if you're a new coach, there are guys in that room that probably think they should be sitting in your chair. And I don't know, depending on what state you're in, but that's a whole other element right there. And that's a whole other level of, now, is this guy sabotaging me? Is he, there's a lot of things that could be going through your head. Probably a lot of them aren't real, but they could be. And so you have to kind of be aware.
Yeah, I think that trust factor with your staff is huge. And maybe that's a conversation you need to have. Like, look, I know some of you applied for this job or whatever, right? But this is how it is. Let's run with it. And that's how I think you work better as a team. Coach Collins this year, I never felt like any of us were ever on the outside of his decision making and operating the team on the scheme side. Of course, he had to make administrative decisions. We weren't necessarily in that conversation always, but I really felt included. I never felt like anyone was trying to sabotage or he was just trying to, kind of put out our fire. So it was really good staff that we were on this year. And I feel like everyone should be like that. If you can't have those conversations and set up that situation, you need to look at how your process is working. We'll push on through the next question here, and that's how do you know when you're ready? And I think that's a huge question because we've already stated that no one's probably ready. So what are like the key factors to you thinking, okay, I'll put in that application because you might get the job. You may not, but you might, right? So when are you ready? And Coach Collins will let you start that one off.
I think you've got to feel like you can install and be completely responsible for at least your side of the ball without reservations, without questions about it. It's got to be something that you've worked with long enough, either offensive or defensively, that part of the job isn't going to drag you down just because of all the additional duties that you're going to take on in that learning curve your first year of dealing with the administration and dealing with the parents. Those things that you haven't been responsible for is going to take a large amount of your time and your mental load. And you need to have at least enough awareness of the other side of the ball, because some guys may get that first job and they've only ever been an offensive coordinator or only ever been a defensive coordinator. And you've got to have at least enough knowledge of the other side of the ball to be confident in whoever you choose to be that coordinator across from you. That he's got a system in and he's making game plans that are effective, that are not going to get us beat, not screwing up big time things. And then you have to at least be confident on some level of your ability to be that guy in charge, to have the tough conversations, because they're going to happen. I would say you probably don't make it through your first year without having 4 or 5 really uncomfortable conversations that have to happen for your team to be able to move forward.
Yeah, tough stuff. Tough stuff. I don't want to jump in, Daniel. Do you have another question for him? I was going to say, the last one he said was the hardest one, I think. Like, can you make are you ready to put a kid off the team? Are you ready to fire somebody? Those are those questions. Like, on paper, we're all ready. Like, we all have here's my rules and regulations. Are you ready to kick off your starting tailback on a playoff game because he broke that? Or have you already made up in your mind that you're going to let that slide? I'm not really saying one's right or wrong on that. You got to figure out what's right for you. Like, I'm not going to come in and judge you, but a lot of things you think you're ready for now in a vacuum, when the pressure cooker gets to you and the admin is at your door pushing you to play somebody you think you shouldn't or not play, whatever it is, can you stand your ground in those moments? And those are the questions you need to be asking yourself is, can I make really hard choices that are going to affect a lot of people and make a lot of people upset? Can I stand my ground when my boss comes to me? Because that's a really hard thing for a head coach, is to look at the guy who hired you, disagree with him, and argue your point. At some point, you're going to have to do what he says because he hired you. But do you have the backbone to at least state your case of why you think he's wrong? And then you're still going to do what he says because he's the boss. That's the way it works. But are you ready for that? Do you have a staff picked out? Like, if you got a job tomorrow, who would you hire? And if it was, well, I'll just put out resumes, that's probably not a good answer. Like, that's kind of, I was in that world. Like, I didn't know a lot of people. Now when you get a job, what's your plan? Like, do you have 2 or 3 guys you think you could take with you? You think you'd go find? Can you build a staff? Are you ready to do that? And then Coach mentioned, when you become a head coach, thinking that, hey, I was a great OC. So, like, you might have been a great OC or a great DJ. That's probably how you got the job. You were great at one side of the ball, so you get promoted. You're actually going to probably take a step back scheme-wise. Like, I know for me it was that way. When you're a head coach, you're balancing 3 million other things. So, like you mentioned, you better be so good at your scheme or have a guy you can train up underneath you in that scheme that you don't take that big step back. Because it's really easy just to be an OC or a DC and call plays and do what you got to do. But to do that plus be a head coach, so a lot of our head coach plus OCs, head coach plus DCs, get ready, because you're going to take a step back scheme-wise because you don't have the time to put into all that stuff.
I want to ask a question here we don't even have it on the script over here, but Coach Collins, I know you came from the DC world and this was your first year calling offense. So what was like how did you make that happen? Where did you stumble? Can you kind of walk me through that situation, going from a long-time DC to first year on the offensive side?
So the majority of it is my offensive like game plan or plan of attack was usually trying to do things that I had trouble with or that gave me trouble as a DC. Things that I didn't like to see happening, things that stressed me out. Because I just, in my mind, that's going to give the other guy trouble on the other side of the field. I think the biggest probably hurdle I had or biggest stumbling block I had was those first 3 games, maybe trying to get play calls in on time and decide what the next play call is. How do I decide what that is? And even though I had somewhat of a system in place for that, there were still times that we struggled with it. Still times we were late. And thankfully I had some guys around me, staff members around me that were like I said, after 3 games, got on board to help kind of figure out that game plan and figure out the system of how we make the next play call based on what we're seeing. And to be honest, I also had a quarterback who had some game savvy about him, and could see things out there that we're not seeing because we're standing on the sideline or we're in the box, or he just knew that we're better than that kid and we can make that play. And occasionally, and I say occasionally, it's probably 5 or 6 times a game, would just point at himself and go make a play call. And after some conversations, that was kind of came to be okay and understood. But I think that getting the play call in on time, switching from defense to offense was probably the biggest challenge. And I was really surprised at it because I had been a DC in a league where we had teams that would go fast. So I thought I was prepared to go fast, but just the difference in thinking between the defense and offensive side slowed that down.
I think offense to me feels I used to think like offense is proactive and defense is reactive. And then when I became a DC, I was like, no, on defense, we're calling the thing that to stop what you're most likely to call in this situation. So from the last time the whistle blows, so the play's over, we begin our analysis, right? And we're getting the play call ready. On offense, like you're still breaking down what happened that very last play amongst all the other positions on defense, right? So I really felt like it becomes more reactionary. What are we seeing? What did we see on that last play? How can I make the next play take advantage of that? On defense, it's just a game plan. Like, hey, this is what we're going to call. Like, we just know, whether it's down and distance, if you're down distance guy, or a field and boundary, whatever your thing is on D. So I understand that, Coach. Like, there's a lot of analysis that goes between the whistles and trying to get that play call in. I thought you did really well this year, man. I thought that the play calls of course we had some times that we screwed it up, right? We laugh all the time at our screw ups this year, but for a first year dude, I think it happened pretty smoothly. The moxie of our quarterback was hilarious because the first few weeks it was not a planned, right? Like he was just like, F you guys, I got this. And we're yelling in the headsets like, what are we doing? We don't know. All right, well, let's see if it works out. But luckily he averaged, 8 or 9 yards a play when he did that. So it worked out okay. Coach Simpson, kind of the same thing to you. Like what, I know you coordinated both sides of the ball. But was there any of that? You're talking about how your scheme steps back. So what were those step backs that you noticed?
Well, I think, one, I've called plays long enough that I've kind of come through that, and Coach will too. As long as the more he calls plays, that'll get solved. The issues that I ran into usually is when you're the OC only, it's easy to make adjustments like between series. You're kind of over there and you're at the TV or you're whatever, and you're going through. When you're the head coach, you don't get to like stop watching the game. You have to kind of be involved, special teams, defense, whatever. So you got to have a system there for who makes adjustments that you trust. How do they coordinate that to you? Like, how do you know that it's been fixed? And then with that knowledge, what plays are we going to call moving forward? So it's always a tough deal. I'm blessed now. I've had some systems that have been with me for a couple of years. So we've been able to work through that, but that takes a while.
Awesome. We'll kind of push on here. We're going to get into so the next question is, why do some coaches thrive in this change and why do others struggle? So, you guys have both thrived. I feel like Coach Simpson is a walking billboard of success, and Coach Collins turned our team around this year. That 3 games in 5 years or something, and now we're 5-5. So, Coach Simpson, I'll let you talk first this time. And that just why do some struggle and some thrive?
Well, and I think a lot of it's your definition of success. You guys mentioned, Coach did you go 500? Is that what it sounds like? But you think about where you were. I mean, so the definition of success at that school, if they'd won 3 games in however many years, and now you won 5, that's a successful season. So a lot of coaches sometimes need to kind of step back and view what does real success look at in this job if I take it. Like, I may go from I'm a perennial powerhouse to a doormat, and we go 500. That's a successful season, but that guy might not see it that way because he's used to winning. I struggled with that a little bit my first year at Southside. We actually won more games than they had won the past 5 years, I think, but I wasn't used to 4-5, 4-6 being a good year. And so, of course, we don't want to live there, but you have to kind of understand that's where it is. So I think a lot of times people don't understand what situation they're stepping into. There's a lot of other things about why guys succeed and don't succeed, but there's that number one, they don't know what they're walking into. And then I'd say number two, a lot of times they're grooming to be a really great OC or a DC. They're not really grooming to be a great head coach, and those are very different things. Like, when I'm grooming to be a great OC or DC, I study scheme constantly, like drills, scheme. If you're studying to be a head coach, go back to the first 20 minutes of this podcast we just did. All of those things are what you're getting yourself prepared for. So a lot of guys aren't preparing themselves for making difficult decisions with people, fundraising, discipline, admin, parents. They have no idea about that stuff. They're not really even trying to prepare for it at all. And then they just walk in cold to this world of, man, like, this is a lot more than I thought it was going to be.
Coach Collins, same question to you. So why do you think some people thrive and some just struggle with that change?
With a little bit of it, I want to tag on to that last thing that Coach Simpson said. There are guys that aren't getting prepared for it. I went through 2 different head coaches at 2 different programs that were not training people, we're not preparing people to move up and take the jobs. I think they were doing very good jobs of training a guy to be an OC or bringing a guy along to be a DC in the future, but they didn't prepare anyone to be a head coach. And then my last head coach that I worked for actually did a really good job of that with me. After 3 or 4 years of working as his defensive coordinator, and I guess to the point that he felt confident that I could handle that job, he started letting me into those other decisions, to those other things that he was dealing with, let me into the fundraising, let me into purchasing equipment and doing some other things. And I got little tastes of those things that the head coach has to be dealing with that aren't necessarily just coaching a position or worrying about scheme, which I feel put me really far ahead when I got that first head coaching job. Because I had at least an idea of what it was like and an idea of some of that things going on. But like you said, I think outside of that, guys spend a whole lot of time studying scheme because we think I've got to perfect my system and my scheme and have all these answers on the field. And I don't know how many guys are really thinking, here's my end goal. I want to be this head coach someday and sit in the chair. And I need to be preparing myself for all of the off the field, non-football related things, the administrative duties, the executive duties, I guess, that the football coach has to take care of. And the guys that are doing that, I think, stand a greater chance of thriving because the shock of transition is not going to be nearly as severe for them.
I always think communication is like the biggest downfall in coaching, period. It's just the ability to just sit and talk to someone, bring up a hard problem. You have mentioned many times, like counseling a person, that's one thing, but just sitting in a room with maybe your superior and telling them the issues you have, that's hard to communicate sometimes. You don't want to look weak in your position. You don't want to look like you can't handle everything. I go back to Varsity Blues all the time and think about, the sheriff and the head coach are sitting at the little bar. It's like a diner. and they're talking about they put their wieners on the glass at the Kiwanis Club, right? And he says, Sheriff, my boy's too much for you. And even the sheriff's like, no, not at all, right? Like, no, absolutely not. We don't want to look weak at the job we're doing, or like we can't handle it. And so sometimes that is a weakness, right? Because now we're not asking for help. We're not communicating well. We just kind of clam up. And Coach Collins, you said the same thing. Like, your coach brought you in after 3 or 4 years. And that could have been as much, maybe he was still learning. Maybe he was still learning on the job or whatever. But communication seems really weak. And I think if you just learn to do that, all of that other stuff we've talked about tonight, like delegation and problem solving and all that comes through communication. In my eyes, I think it's a way to really kind of break into that. So you talked about not preparing themselves enough. So how can a coach, like I don't want to say the best way to prepare yourself, but what are very key things to prepare yourselves for?
You want me to go first, or you want to
Yeah, why not? No, that'll work. Go ahead.
Well, I pretty much do the opposite of that. I mean, I think a lot of times head coaches have so much on their plate. Daniel, you've said this a few times in this podcast, is no head coach is going to turn down a guy that comes in his office and says, hey, coach, I want to be a head coach. What are some things I can do to help you? Most head coaches in that role there might be a guy or two that tells you nothing, but probably they'll give you something to do. So there's always those off the field jobs. Coach mentioned them. That could be, they're not really fun. They could be equipment orders. That sucks. Like, okay, do that. Laundry, it could be laundry. Okay, it could be fundraising. All of those things are something you need to learn how to do. Dealing with parents. It could be technology. There's all these things that are part of the program that have nothing to do with X's and O's. And so I don't want to discourage guys from getting better at X's and O's. We've kind of talked about that you need to be solid in what you're doing on both sides so you can evaluate others. But most really, really good head coaches, I don't know if they're really the best scheme people. They're the best communicators. They're the best encouragers. They're the best motivators. They're the most organized. And they are people that you want to work for. There's different ways. So when I say that, I want to be clear on that. You go to work for some people because they're funny and you enjoy being around them. And that's fine. That's who they are. You go to some people because they'll push you to be excellent. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, I'm talking about, we're going to push you to be the best version of you. So if you're looking at getting prepared, 1, ask for work to do, and 2, find one of those guys to go work for. You want to be prepared, go find a guy who's going to push you to be the best you can be and tell him what your goal is. And if he is what you think he is, he can help you potentially get to where you want to go.
That's awesome. Coach Collins, for you, same question. What should coaches be prepping themselves for?
I think Coach Simpson probably hit it on the head. If you're out there, young coach, position coach, coordinator, position coaches, you probably need to be preparing for the next spot, taking over as a coordinator somewhere. And I think you can probably study both sides of the ball and start preparing for that. That way you've got an opportunity either way. I also gave my special teams over to somebody this year, and probably 90% of the calls they made, which took a huge part off of my plate. So if you're confident you're in that area or your abilities to run that area, I think you should be able to at least bring it up. And then coordinators need to be able to tell, hopefully you can tell your head coach, you've got that kind of relationship with him. Hey, I want to be a head coach. This is my goal. And those are the guys that I want working for me as coordinators. I want guys that want to progress and get better. And then hopefully you're with a guy that when you tell him that's your goal, he's going to help you take over some of the smaller jobs. If I really believed if I had a coach that could do something almost as well as I could do it, I need to let him do it because I can be more free to work on all those other things that I had going. And I had a guy on my staff this year that would take over pretty much anything from me that I was doing. And really, he said, and I think, Daniel, you put it to me, my job is to take everything off of your plate that I can. That way you have more time to be the head coach. And I think if you're doing that and you're putting yourself in that position where you're taking everything off of your head coach's plate that you can, you're preparing yourself to be a head coach in the future.
Absolutely. All right. So the fun question here: what is the worst part about being the head coach? And we've got a little versus an assistant. So comparing the two, what are the cons about being a head coach? If someone's like, maybe I should take the job or maybe not. Coach Collins, will let you go first here.
I think the biggest difference, con wise, would be you have to be ready to be the guy that gets the criticism. Because no matter what goes bad, it was my fault, or the buck stopped with me anyway. Even if it was something on the defensive side of the ball or something in special teams, ultimately I'm responsible for that, and I'm mainly the name that they're yelling up in the stands and talking about at the diner on Saturday morning, because I wasn't getting the job done or that I'm screwing up. Whether it's the the dad that thinks I should be in 4 tight ends and running the ball all the time, or I should be in air raid and throwing it every other time. There's going to be someone that criticizes every decision you make. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between an assistant coach and a head coach, and that you have to be ready to take that kind of criticism and that kind of pressure or the heat there.
I was hoping that would come to light.
Can I have your dad? I'm saying I want his dad in my stand. No, I've never met a dad that wants to be in 4 tight ends and run the ball unless his son's the running back. So
I had one come in this year that wanted me to. I think he said you need to be in 2 tight ends and run the ball more.
Man, send him to Southside Batesville. I will take him right now. He can come sit in my bleachers. He'll love it. No, I was going to say a couple things on there. Coach hit a lot of them there. I would say number one, the pressure / stress. That it's all on you. Coach mentioned it. Ultimately, it's all on you. When you're an assistant coach, when practice is over, unless coach has a meeting, you go home and you might think about what you're going to do a little bit at practice, but not really. When you're a head coach, you don't get to go home after practice. You have to sit there and deal with that laundry list of stuff that you have left in your lap. Stuff like discipline issues from your players, parent meetings you got to deal with, kids' grades that you got to work with their teacher. I have yet to find like a principal or somebody walk up and say, hey, one of your English students did whatever, but they'd love to walk up and tell me that one of my football players did blah, blah, blah. It's usually not good if they're referring to them as my football player. There are students when they're really good, and they're my football players when we got to handle them. So when you're the head coach, that's you. When you're a position coach, you look at the head coach and go, hey, what do you want me to do? Because you don't have to make that decision. So your decision making probably goes almost tenfold from an assistant coach to a head coach. All the small, what seem like not very big ones, like think about, what about dual sport? Your quarterback wants to go shoot hoops to get ready for basketball season. The basketball coach has told him to go. Well, you're the head coach. Guess who deals with that? You do. And every assistant coach tells you how stupid they think it is because they have their opinion. And then you have the opinion over here. And then you try to, what is the best answer for this kid? And so you're going to make somebody mad. And then you have all the, what I call other duties as assigned, just all the random extra things that get thrown on you. My wife laughed because, 2021, I was just the OC here at Southside. So I would go do the pregame meal at 2:30, come back here and take a nap before the game on Friday. And she said, I've never seen you at home on a Friday afternoon ever. And I said, well, I don't have to be back till 5, But when I was a head coach, guess who never left the field house? Because there's always something that was going on. And guess who's back in that same stinking role? It's me. So that's the other stuff that no one really kind of prepares you for, where assistant coach, man, it's work, but it's not. It's almost 10 times the decision making and stress when you're the head coach.
I think something I see, once again, I'm not a head coach, but something I have seen over and over again is, as an assistant coach or a coordinator, you're working with a team that's all in the same office. Okay, so and although we can't all communicate well, if I have an issue, I can talk to the guy that's going to make the decision to fix it right now, and I can usually have an answer. And that guy is a football coach, and he's worried about football, and we can sit down and have that talk and work it out, even if it's between 2 or 3 people, whatever. We'll solve it. We can add the next play. We can change the scheme, whatever it is we need to do. Working with administration, however, where you have an athletic director that may or may not have ever coached a down of football, may or may not give a crap about your program. Oh, all in all, we want them to be very even keel and give all the, the same benefits and same attention and same pride in every sport. But we know that doesn't happen, right? So when you start having to ask questions of and try to get problems solved by someone who's not in your office and someone who doesn't necessarily give a crap about your situation, or maybe they're just being pulled in a lot of different directions. Their attention does not always reside in that locker room. That is something that I have seen people struggle with. It's something that's infuriated me as an assistant coach when I'm like, why can't, this is the answer. We have the answer. Let's just do the thing. And we're like, well, that's not okayed yet by the athletic director, right? And it's one of those things that's on their requirements. Or, that could go to the superintendent, a principal, a board member, whatever. It could go all the way up the chain to someone who can tell you no, and that might, may not settle well with you, whatever. But working with a guy who's not necessarily in the boat rowing with you, but your program depends on them, that would be frustrating to me.
If I could cut in, there's also a list of things you say you believe in as a head coach. This is what I'm about. And just for example, one of mine was, I'm about family. I love my kids. I love my wife. I'm not going to stay at the football office just to be there. I'm going to be there. And I'm going to get work done when I'm there. And if there's work to be done, I'm working. But when it's done, I want to be with my family, go home. And I told my assistant coaches that. And it seemed like every belief I had like that this first year was absolutely tested. I had an assistant coach that would, I think, 3 times come in and say, hey, my girl's got a soccer game. And, I preached this for years, that I believe in family and you shouldn't miss your kids' stuff. And thankfully enough, I let him go. And he got to go to his kids' soccer games. But you need to be ready for that too, because especially at the point that you say, I believe in this, whatever this is, it's going to find a way to get tested. And you're going to have to make the decision. Do you really believe in this enough to stand by it? Or are you going to crumple when it's decision time, when the pressure's on, and fold and actually not stand behind what you've claimed to believe in?
Yeah, 100%. There's nobody above you telling you we're changing the way things that's done, right? As assistant coach, I can have that belief, but my head coach can say, "No, dude, we're here." That's a good one, coach. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so some of these may sound a little bit redundant, but we'll knock them out, and if we got to skip it, we'll just skip it. First question here is last part. What are some tips for coaches thinking about making the change in the future? Coach Collins, I'll let you go first here.
The first advice is, and I think it's the same thing I gave to a couple of head coaches, you need to have that packet ready, that thing that you're going to give to whoever you're interviewing with. And it's got to have enough detail in there to show them that I've thought out the plan and the process. And I have put thought into discipline, into parent meetings, into the summer program, into the weight program. You really want to have that thing, make it look like you have all of the answers ready to go, especially that first coaching job you're trying to get. And then my other advice would be to be ready for conflict. You can't hide from it. And I don't know if conflict's going to be a parent meeting because you have parents not happy, or an AD coming to you because he's not happy or he's got a problem, or teachers, kids are going to come to you with problems and conflicts. Your assistant coaches will. And managing all of those people together is something that you have to be mentally ready for ahead of time before you sit down in the chair, or those problems will bog you down and take over all the time that you need to be using to do other things.
That's a good one. A really good one. I didn't think about that one. Coach Simpson.
Yeah, I was going to, context is a big one. Like, you need to know, start branching out and making contacts, going to coaches' events. Like, if your state has a state coaching event, you need to start making contacts, because it's all about who you know most of the time on getting a job. If it's not in-house, a lot of times getting an interview is going to be, who do you know that can get you in front of these people? So you need to start doing that. You need to think about your potential staff. Coach mentioned having a packet ready. on your packet, you can list all kinds of things that are on there. But kind of knowing, hey, if I get in here, here's my plan on bringing in coaches. Here's what I'm kind of thinking. Here's what I think we can do to build our team. And then be very specific with where you go. Like I've had guys turn in packets to me just as an assistant with the wrong school name on there, because they're applying for every job. And we might have done this before. I mean, if you're listening, there's a good chance you might have, but it's okay to want to move up. Like it's okay to be hungry, and it's okay to want to take a job that's going to be a better job for your family. Nobody is going to blame anybody for that. However, when you're choosing your first head coaching job, you need to be a lot more patient than you probably think you need to be, because there are some good jobs out there, but there are a lot of bad jobs out there. And I see a lot of coaches take a bad job because it was the only job that was offered to them in that moment. And then 2 years later, when they're fired from going whatever, they're really going to struggle getting the second job. So that first job becomes extremely important. So choose wisely, like take your time and choose wisely on your first job. It doesn't have to be a perfect job, but when I say choose wisely, here's what I'm talking about. One, is there potential to take the program better than it was before? So that bar can be whatever. If they're a 500 team, can you make them a playoff team? If they're a winless team, can you get them to 500? If they're a playoff team, can you get them? You need to take them better than what they were. Can you do that? Is that possible? The second thing you need to look at is the administration, because the first time you have a parent meeting, you're going to find out real quickly, did you choose a good administration or not? If they back you, you chose well. And if they're going to crumble to everything the parents want, run as fast as you can, because you can't work in those jobs and do what you need to do. You want to hopefully figure that out on the front end, if possible.
That's awesome stuff, guys. That's I'm just gonna take notes. I'm just gonna print that section out for myself because those are a lot of good points. What are some possible pitfalls to a first-year head coach or someone trying to make that jump? Let's go, Coach Collins. Why not? Let's get it.
Probably the biggest pitfall or trap I see waiting out there is not knowing when to ask for help or doing too much. There's a ton of stuff that you become responsible for, and you can't do it all. And even so, I coached high school softball for 12 years as a head coach before I took over as a head football coach. And there I was entirely capable of doing it all. The administrative duties, the administrative load wasn't nearly as high as managing what I have 6 assistant coaches and 3 different teams, a high school, a junior high, and a 7th grade or middle school team. So completely incapable of doing it all like I had been in softball. And if you try to do all of it, don't give up anything. You're going to get to the point where things start falling through the cracks. They don't get done. You start pushing it off to tomorrow. So I think the biggest advice I could give you about a pitfall is know when to ask for help and know how to delegate. If you've got a guy that can do the job maybe 75% as well as you can, it may be better to give that to him and let him do that job. And in doing so, you're starting to mentor him to move up and to take on more responsibility and hopefully become a coordinator or a head coach one day. And, you're not really doing that much. You're letting him take care of some stuff that is really just taking up your time. And all you have to do is, hey, make sure it was done. And you also have to be willing to give up a little control like that. If I turn to one of my assistants and I say, hey, this is yours now, and you're going to take care of it, it's probably not going to get done 100% the way that I want. And I have to be okay with that. If it's something that I can't be okay with, that has to stay with me. But if I'm okay with it, he's going to get the job done, and he's going to get it done to where I think it's good. It may not be the exact way or the exact thing that I would have chose, but that job's getting done. He's getting mentored to improve his craft, and I didn't have to do so much. And I think we're both winning in that situation, and the team is winning.
I think there's 100 different 80-20 rules out nowadays. Everybody has taken numbers 80 and 20 and made them mean whatever they want. But one of the two that I use, because even I have multiple, is if someone can do something 80% as good as you, and it gives you back 20% of your time, give it up. It's fine. They're going to get better, and that 80% will increase, and that 20% will never get lower. You know what I mean? It's not going to at some point would have only been 10% of your time. So they will get better, and they'll be able to do the thing. I mix that with, I teach even in the classroom when I'm coaching, whatever. I use respect a lot. The word respect just means a lot to me about giving it, getting it. I don't believe you have to earn it. It's just we all do it, right? And I think there's an old story. I probably saw it on social media about like a kid was cleaning the garage, and he came out, and the dad said, he said, "Dad, I'm done." He said, "Okay, well, are you proud of the job?" Well, no, the kid had to go back and do a little bit more, right? And then he came out and he said, "Now I'm proud of it, so now I'm done." Like, and that's something you have to talk to those coaches about if you're going to give that up. Like, be proud of it. Whatever I give you, when you give it to me, it should be whatever you are proud of having done. If you can put it in the newspaper and be proud that it went out, and you're not going, "Oh my God, I can't believe they put that out there," right? Then it's probably okay. That 80% will definitely get better from that point. Coach Simpson.
Yeah, I've actually the first book I wrote, that Find a Way. I don't like to advertise on podcast. We just talk, but it's right behind my head here.
He's got his own advertisement company here. And he doesn't like to
it's right behind my head. But anyway, it just kind of made me think about, because Coach brought up delegation. So one of the chapters in there is about trying to delegate. And so I use a story that my dad told me. He's a retired military guy. So Daniel, you may enjoy this if you haven't already heard it.
Most likely.
He said there are 3 Ds of delegation. You decide, you delegate, and then you depart. And he said, and that's the way you lead effectively in the military. You make a decision, you delegate who's going to do it, and then you depart and you leave and you let them do that. And y'all mentioned a lot of things for it. I'll give you one other story. I think it's in that book. So this, I can't remember which, it's one of the generals. Guy was bringing him war plans about what they were going to do, wrote up what they were going to do, and he put it on his desk. And guy comes back in and asks, "How was the report?" And he says, "Not good enough." And so the guy takes it, fine tunes it, brings it back, sets it down there again. "How was the report?" "Not good enough." This happens about 2 or 3 times. And finally, on the 3rd time, the guy goes berserk and says, "Sir, I did everything I possibly could, yada, yada, yada." Very upset. And the general picks up and says, "Okay, now I'll read it." And so the idea again of, if you're going to delegate, there needs to be that slight hint of, I better not screw this up. Like, if I'm going to give you the delegation, it can be a lot of ways. It could be fear, it could be respect, it could be love, it could be any of those motivating factors. But there needs to be a healthy dose of, I better get this done.
Yeah. All right. So last little question here, and we'll get into our what not to do. But so this one is, if you were to kind of, and it may be too much, but if you were to put your first 90 days as head coach on paper, what are your key things that must be done? I see Coach Simpson shaking his head like, this whole podcast,
I wrote a whole book on this one. This is a head coach workbook, and you could do a whole book, because I literally did. So
so let's just we'll shorten it down. 90 days is a long time. So what are the first 3 things you're taking care of as a head coach?
You're going me first or coach?
Yeah. Let's let you go first here.
Okay. I would say 1, you got to have your staff. So that's going to have to be done really, really quickly. 2, you probably need to assess your players and figure out the scheme. What kind of scheme are you going to run? What kind of players do you have? What kind of situation do you have? So a lot of assessing going on there. You need to assess your players, assess situation, assess, what you got to go raise money for, all of that stuff, which can be done in a lot of ways. You can bring them in and interview them. You can talk to them. You can talk to stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. You need to make sure you have your staff in place. 3rd thing is probably, to me, you need to start coming up with a plan of how you're going to actually install whatever you have coming. And that could be scheme, that could be raising money for facilities, that could be setting a summer schedule. So basically, bring in your help, assess your needs, and then now how are we going to make it work?
Awesome. I like it. Coach Collins.
I don't even know if I like you going 30 days. So I've got it in my packet, like a 30, a 60, and a 90-day plan of things that we've got to get done. And it is all those things Coach Simpson mentioned. And let's face it, if we're taking over as a first-year head coach, anywhere we're at our first year, probably more than half the time we're taking over because the last guy didn't meet some level of expectation, whether it's community or administration. The ones of us that are lucky are taking over the place maybe that we've been at and we've been successful for a number of years, and the head coach is retiring and we're just the heir to something that's already built and running well. But most of us aren't that lucky. And I think one of the biggest things that I would want to get done is a meeting with the parents and the players to lay out, here's the expectations. Here's how things are going to be run now. What has happened and what's in the past is in the past. Here's how we do it now. And this is the plan to change and to start a turnaround or a rebuilding of the culture and the program.
That's awesome. Once again, I'm just printing this section off. I'm just making a notebook at this point. You guys are an abundance of knowledge. All right, man. So we'll get into our favorite part of the show here, and that's what not to do as a coach. So Coach Simpson, why don't you give us our lesson for the day?
Sure. So today's lesson, and Coach Collins, you can feel free to add in if you want to when this is done. Today's lesson on what not to do as a coach is be a Monday morning coach, especially as an assistant. One of the biggest temptations to do is to see something that you think you could do different or better than the head coach, see it come to fruition. I knew that was going to happen. And then go ahead and express that thought to people that they don't need to hear that thought. Basically being disloyal. A lot of times we have no idea why that head coach made the decision we made. I've got a lot of knowledge of players' personal lives that none of my assistants have access to, nor do they need to know. And so a lot of times I'll make a decision on this kid's not kicked off the team, this kid's this punishment, this kid's that punishment, with a whole lot more knowledge than they have. And it might be the wrong decision. I don't really know. I'm just trying to make a decision based on the best knowledge that I have. Where a lot of times as an assistant coach, it's really easy to sit back in our nice no pressure chair and critique up towards things that we have no idea about what happened or why they went there. I'm not suggesting that you can't voice an opinion to a head coach. I am saying let's not voice that opinion to people who are not the head coach, especially people that might rally around and form some issues. So today's lesson on what not to do is basically don't be disloyal, but don't be a Monday morning look back and question every decision the head coach made. Instead, voice your opinion on the front end, work to help the coach through whatever he did, and then support him on the back end.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You gotta make it your own choice, right? Like if they've made a decision, make it your decision and work to make it come to fruition. In the military, we always say like make every decision right. It doesn't matter what it is. Like if you just work your tail off to make all of them right, then you're fine. If you're constantly working to make your decision right, that means you're probably, like you said, being disloyal and you're hurting the plan, and that's never successful, right? In the long run. Coach Collins, anything to add on the lesson of the day there?
Not really. The one thing that I think he said big time is I wanted assistants that felt free in the confines of our office to say, I think we should do it this way. Because I'm smart enough to know that I'm not the smartest guy in the room. And I always felt that my assistant coaches had input that was valuable because they had different viewpoints than I did. But then again, like Coach Simpson said, at the end of the day, the head coach makes the decision. Once we leave the office, you're 100% behind him, behind the program, and supporting him and being loyal. Because especially the younger guys that want to move up to being head coaches, the last thing you want to get around there is that you're running around trying to cut the throat of your head coach behind his back.
All right, man. So, Coach Simpson, why don't you once again remind us somewhere we can go to make football coaching simpler for coaches and football playing simpler for players?
Sure. Coaching 101 podcast sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Plenty of workbooks over there, the offensive material of the Offensive Coordinator Academy, actual academy, as well as multiple courses, worksheets, templates, courses, anything you want on offense at offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. It also hosts defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, the same thing, but for defense. So if you're a defensive coach, would like to check out the materials over there, you can go to defensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Finally, also fbcoachsimpson.com, which houses now 30 books, as well as 3 seasons worth of headsets, a free magazine for any coach that would like to read, as well as Gun T System, all things the Gun T, from the full system to the books, to the PowerPoints, to whatever you might possibly want, and the 3-4 swarm defense. If you're interested in the 3-4 swarm or just want to learn a little bit about the odd front defense, you can go over to fbcoachsimpson.com.
Awesome. I will mention one more time, Adaptable Physical Therapy. We're a new physical therapy clinic in Grove, Oklahoma. Wife is the doctor there, Dr. Samantha Chamberlain. She specializes in concussions, geriatrics, sports performance, injury prevention, all the things that coaches need to take care of themselves or take care of their kids. So if you've got someone, she does free assessments for local high school players of any sport. It doesn't have to be football. She's our sideline help, so she's doing it out there. So she'll do it for you and your team. So if you're in anywhere in the 4-state area here, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, feel free to come over to Grove, Oklahoma and check it out. And then athleticspeedmovement.com, where we're just trying to help you teach your kids how to run fast and allow them to kind of gain new heights. And our goal is when you go on a long road trip and you show up, they've left the grass long. So they leave the grass long, they think that you're faster than them, and that's where we all want to be. We want them knowing, or at least thinking, that we're faster than them. So send them some fast tape. Come over to athleticspeedmovement.com. Social media wise, Coach Collins, where can we find you on social media if we wanted to ask you a question about your system?
On Twitter at Coach Beau Collins. Pretty much that's the only social media I've got going right now is the Twitter.
Absolutely. What about, is there an email we could send out an email to?
Coach Beau Collins at gmail.com.
Perfect. Appreciate it. And Kenny?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So FBCoachSimpson at gmail.com or at FB Coach Simpson on Twitter. You can find FBCoachSimpson.com and just ask questions on the website as well. Or you can go over to any of the Facebook groups. So the Academy Facebook groups, Shotgun Wing Tee Facebook group, a lot of different groups. If you don't want me to help you, that's fine. There's a lot of smart guys over in those groups that can help you.
That's awesome. You can find me on Twitter at Coach Chambo OK. That's all the social media I really do. You can email me at any time with questions. I had one the other day. So military guy reached out and said, hey, I'm a future new coach. What's your best advice? And I tried to hook him up best I could. But that's at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Wilt the Stilt, Google him, copy his last name, put it before footballconsulting@gmail.com, and you'll have me. The podcast is at Coaching 101 Pod. I don't usually call podcast pod, but Twitter shortened us. Thank you, Elon. So we'll be a pod now. And you'll see what's coming out. We're giving sneak peeks of the coming up episodes and just a little bit of information there. Once again, if you have any questions, you can also just DM us there or post on the site, whatever you want to do. Any last comments before we get out of here, gentlemen? Coach Collins, man, we're super, super thankful you took the time out of your weekend and your softball schedule to come hang out with us and talk a little football. As a guy who just went through it, it's very valuable information, and we definitely appreciate that.
Thank you. I was glad to come out and be on.
Yeah, I had to finally get him on the podcast. That's really how he's been listening to me talk for a year now, so I figured I'd, pay the debt. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We hope you'll join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.